Okay, well today I thought I would spend a little time dealing with a very mundane, almost insignificant topic, and that's PC board standoffs and different kinds, and I want to show you a few things about them. You probably all recognize a standoff on a PC board when you see it. It's got really two purposes. One is to physically mount a PC board in an enclosure, such as you see here. I've shown you this pig rig before. So that's holding that good and solid in its enclosure. But it's also insulating it, raising it above the conductive base or the chassis. In this case it's PC board material, this enclosure made of PC board material. But it keeps it high enough off of the conductive surface that it's no other insulation is required. It also provides a little bit of airflow around the bottom if you're trying to dissipate quite a bit of heat. You see this has got a copper bar on there for that purpose, but getting some airflow underneath. So there's a few good reasons for standoffs, and I want to talk a little bit about the different kinds, the different types. The ones that you often see are metal. I've got some examples here. There's really two different metals used. Steel, which has been plated, zinc or usually something like that. I guess it used to be cadmium. I don't think that's too popular anymore. But steel or aluminum, another popular. Here's a big long standoff, another popular and easy. Both are good, fairly good conductors. If you're going to use them as conductors, I'll have more to say about that in just a minute. So you've got metal types, and they come in different finishes and different sizes. This one's pretty hefty. That's about 3/8 of an inch there, and I don't know, what is that, 1.5 inches long. Some are just plain tubes, such as this one, and some of them, such as these, are, you really can't necessarily see that in there, but threaded. And you find the same distinction, threaded versus just plain hollow tubes, in plastic types. These this assortment here is nylon. You can get them in nylon or Delrin. I imagine there's probably other plastics you can get them in as well. This one is threaded. I think it's with a 440 thread, but there are some in this selection, some big hefty ones here that are just plain tubes. Here's a real fat one here. This one actually is threaded, and it looks like it's a number 6 size thread. So nice and big and hefty. I don't think I'd ever need anything quite that big, but it's possible. Anyway, so you've got metal or plastic, you've got threaded or unthreaded, and you also have just plain round or cylindrical. And then in both kinds of materials, metal or plastic, you also have hexagonal, which can be kind of handy if you want to really torque them down with a nut driver or some kind of a wrench. Personally, I have no fixed preference for plastic over metal. The metal is heftier, more heavy. Sometimes I want a little bit of weight, and I'll give you a good reason for that in just a minute. The metal ones, I can tell you, especially the steel ones, the threaded steel ones, the hexagonal threaded steel ones that have been zinc plated or otherwise plated, can be quite costly, upwards of $1 a piece on some of them. The plastic are a lot cheaper, and I have no, as I said, no fixed preference. Some might think that if you use metal, you can use it as a way of connecting your printed board circuit board to the chassis ground, and that might be true. I prefer separate ground wires or straps myself, and not to rely on just these mechanical connections. I suppose with star washers and that sort of thing, you could probably get a pretty good connection. But I prefer to do it in a different way, and so I don't really care if it's plastic as long as it's strong enough. Notice this one has got built into it a threaded portion there. It's threaded, female thread here and male thread on the other side here. That could be handy for some purposes. I prefer the ones that are threaded, and the reason for that can be illustrated again by this pig rig. You see, I've got the stand. You really can't see this. I don't think you can see the standoff. Well, slightly there. You can see this standoff here. And I've got the screw heads coming down from the top. These are just plain straight, no, not threaded. Those standoffs are metal. They're aluminum, but they're not threaded. But you turn it over on the back, and you see why I don't like non-threaded standoffs. You have to use a nut somewhere. It's either the nut's going to be here on the bottom of the enclosure, or it's going to be up here on the PC board. And I opted, in this case, to put the nut and the washer underneath, because it's going to sit on a table anyway with some other rubber feet, so it doesn't it won't show. But I just don't like the look of it. I would prefer to have screw heads down here and screw heads up here, which means then that I need to use a standoff that's threaded on both ends, and these things then are the nuts. The nut function is built into the standoff, and I just prefer the threaded standoffs for that reason. And I like to use low, back where it belongs, use low profile. I didn't use low profile screws here. I also prefer to use black screws, but I'll make the trivial subject of screw types part of another video. But so plastic or metal, one way or another, that's fine. I slightly prefer the hexagonal to the simply round types, but frankly, I can get hold of a standoff and screw it down finger tight, and for small assemblies of this kind, that's plenty good for me. And once again, I'm not relying on the standoff for any ground connection, so as long as the thing is held in there and it's finger tight, that's pretty good for me. But it's just a little easier to get a hold of a hexagonal, whether it's plastic or metal, and hold it while you're screwing down. It's just slightly easier. If I had a preference, I would use the hexagonal in either plastic or metal. Well, aside from the mechanical or electrical characteristics, my only other concern with standoffs has to do with cost. Now, you see I have a nice collection here, and I've got a lot more junk other places. I've complained about my lack of organization in another video. I'm hoping to improve. But I've got a nice little collection here, so I'm not likely to run out soon. But on the other hand, I have this habit of looking at something. Look at this cool, really nice metal standoff thing. Well, I'm not going to use it just for this project. I'm going to save that for some, fabulous project in the future. It's a silly thing to do, but that's what I do. And I use a lot of standoffs because I make a lot of things like this. There's this little fixture. It's a test of a peak detector. You see, maybe you can see the one end 60 glass-bodied diode there, and it's a resistive bridge, and I found this SMA connector in my junk box. It's got this thing built into it, but I didn't care. It's just a little fixture for me to do some testing on and evaluating of different components. You see, I've got one resistor slipped into a header connector there for testing. But you see, I've installed some standoffs on that, so that when I set it down on my work surface, it's not at some weird angle. It's not touching the connections on the back. In this case, I used metal. I might even swap these out and put some steel ones on. These are aluminum, so that it gives the thing, this little tiny thing, some weight and heft, so that when I hook cable or wire up to it, the stiffness of those doesn't just whip it around all. I hate that. In fact, I have on a few occasions hot glued some weights on the bottom of this kind of thing, so that, you know, it has a little bit more heft. I have some other examples of that kind of thing, but my bench is so messy here. I wonder where I've put it. Well, here's something I can show you that I'm going to make a separate video on this little thing. Here's sort of a development platform I put together. There's a LCD readout here, and an Arduino Uno here with a shield on top for prototyping. Now, right here I'm testing out Adafruit's 53 or SI 5351 clock generator breakout board. I'll have more to say about that in the future as well. But you see, I've got this sort of these mounted on these standoffs, and in fact on the back I've put feet. I'll show this more detail later, but this is an example of how I use these standoffs quite frequently, and I have here a programmer, a PIC programmer that I made, oh my gosh, 1998 or so. It's pretty old, and I went all out. I put it on this nice acrylic base with feet, but I make a lot of things, maybe not quite this fabulous, but more along the lines of this. And I just use a lot of standoffs because I just prefer to have, this doesn't need an enclosure. It really doesn't. This kind of a thing. I'll be using it again, but still, it doesn't. It really, I can't be spending my time putting things in enclosures. I can just put this, carefully in a drawer and pull it out when I need it. But it is nice to have it a little bit, more easily used with those standoffs. So I use a lot of standoffs, and I would encourage others to use them for this kind of a purpose as well, not just in your fabulous projects, but for this kind of a thing. So that means that if you don't have otherwise this fabulous collection of stuff, which I'm now going to get out of the way, by the way, then you can buy standoffs, but you could spend a lot more money on mechanical hardware than you end up spending on some components. So let's talk about a few ways of making some cheap standoffs, and I've tried a couple of ways, and I'll try some more that I can report on later. So let me show you that.